Please be seated. Back on the record, State of Ohio versus Daniel Groves and State of Ohio versus Jessica Groves, NCR 586A and B. Is the state ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense ready to proceed?
We are, Your Honor. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Team, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, State of Ohio would call Patricia Kraft.
Please raise your right hand for me, please. Ma'am, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Ma'am, please have a seat. Now, ma'am, we do have media in the courtroom today. Do you object to your image being filmed or photographed during your testimony?
Yes.
You do?
Your Honor, may we approach?
You may. Thank you, Mr. Tiemann. The witness has objected to her image being filmed, would ask the camera to be lowered. Certainly, the testimony can be recorded as the audio, and the portion of the image that would not show her face. Tiemann, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, again, could you state your name for the record?
Patricia Kraft.
And could you spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Patriciacraft.
Now, if you would, this is a courtroom that has a lot of echoing, a lot of squeaks and groans, being an old courtroom. If you could you speak up like you're hollering across the room to somebody, all right?
Yes.
Do you have any education?
I have a bachelor's degree with a minor in social work.
Where did you receive your bachelor's degree?
Morehead State University.
Have you had any other kind of training besides your degree training?
Excuse me?
Have you had any other training besides your degree?
I was a foster parent for 10 years.
Where are you currently employed?
Scioto County Children's Services.
If you could, where were you employed prior to Scioto County Children's Services?
Shawnee Family Health Center.
Anywhere else?
Not at that time.
Okay. How long have you been with Children's Services Board?
A year and a half.
So June or July of 2018?
Yes.
And what is your title at Scioto County Children's Services?
Ongoing caseworker.
Now, what does Scioto County Children's Services do?
We get referrals through our referring system, and an investigator or an intake worker will put the information in, and based on that information, it will determine whether it's screened in or screened out. That means if it's screened in, an investigator will go and check the situation out. If it's screened out, then it just don't get nothing done with.
Is Scioto County Children's Services considered a government agency?
Yes.
Okay. Are they under the umbrella of Job and Family Services?
Yes.
All right. And what is their main goal at Scioto County Children's Services?
Reunification with the family.
All right. Is it also designated the Child Protective Services of Scioto County?
Yes, sir.
Now, you've indicated the process, so to speak, of getting referrals and investigating and going from there. Is that something that you also have to go to court for?
Yes.
And what court do you generally go to when there's a removal action?
Juvenile court.
Okay. Scioto County Juvenile Court specifically?
Yes.
So are you familiar with the juvenile court hearing process.
Yes, sir.
Could you explain that hearing process?
The first hearing is a probable cause. At that time, we show the evidence of why the child was removed. Then it will be set for adjudication and a disposition later on.
Okay. Now, sometimes things happen before you can get into court that are of an emergency situation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And sometimes there's an initial one-sided hearing at that point. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. And they call that an ex parte hearing?
Ex parte.
Okay. And then from there, they have the probable cause to confirm what happened in the ex parte hearing
Yes.
after everybody's given notice.
Yes.
Okay. And adjudication is a fancy way of saying the hearing on whether or not there's an issue. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And then disposition's like, what do we ultimately want to do with the child?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to direct your attention to a child by the name of Dylan Groves, and to a certain extent, his brother Daniel Groves Jr. Are you familiar with these children?
Yes.
How are you familiar with the Groves children?
I was the ongoing caseworker.
And what does ongoing caseworker mean?
I do the monthly checks and make sure that they're following what the case plan states. Make sure they're going to the doctor's appointments, drug treatment, parenting class, whatever is put in the case plan.
All right, so prior to you getting involved, there's another personnel at Children's Services that investigates the initial referral?
Yes.
Okay. And who was the investigator in this case?
Lauren Johnson.
All right. What is your understanding of, well, let me back up. When, specifically with regard to Dylan Groves, how did your agency become aware that there might be an issue?
It was referral. We got a referral through the hospital when Dylan was born.
Okay. And what was the process from there with that regard?
The investigator went to the hospital to check on the child, and then it was then determined that there was no kinship available, and that's when Dylan was placed in foster care.
All right. The children, the parents of Dylan Groves, are they in the courtroom here today?
Yes.
Could you identify them by name for the record?
Daniel Groves and Jessica Groves.
Could you point them out for the court, please?
Daniel's in the sage shirt, and Jessica's in the cream-colored hair with the burgundy shirt. Or purple. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, now when Children's Services becomes involved in a case, do they maintain records of that case and any activities involved in that case?
Yes.
Are those records kept in the ordinary course of Children's Services business?
It's just SACWIS through the computer system.
Okay. And they're kept in any kind of abuse, neglect, dependency case that comes through the door?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Let the record reflect, I'm handing the witness what has been marked as State's Exhibit 8. During the break, I already went to opposing counsel and had them reviewed.
Counsel, I thought 8 was open for adoption and submission to 9.
Make this okay. We'll make this 16.
16.
All right, I'm going to hand you what's marked as State's Exhibit 16. This is a microphone, so we don't want to slam anything on there, but could you take a look at those records? Ma'am, the records I've put in front of you, what do they appear to be?
They are documentation from each caseworker
Okay, with regard to whom?
to Dylan.
All right. Would you check the back? There might be some in there for Daniel as well.
They are.
All right. And it's going to get a little awkward because there was 2 sets of documentation provided. So I put some tabs there where there might be some overlap of some case plans. So don't remove those tabs yet. The defense counsel's okay with those being there, I assume. Those records appear to be accurate records of Children's Services records with regard to the Groves family.
Yes.
And are you familiar with these records?
Yes.
As we go through your testimony, it may be easier for you to be able to refer to those records as we go through somewhat chronologically. So feel free to utilize those records. I might ask you for some specific dates as well, okay? All right, you indicated that Children's Services had got involved in the case from a referral from the hospital. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what hospital was that?
SOMC.
All right. And then you indicated that Ms. Johnson, Lauren Johnson, was the investigator that went to the hospital?
Yes.
And you indicated ultimately that Children's Services removed the child from the parents and took emergency custody. I'd like to go back before that to earlier on at the hospital. The records are there in front of you for reference. Initially, what was the Children's Services plan with regard to Dylan Groves?
There was an activity log on 111 where caseworker Johnson spoke with Mr. Groves and stated that he had not known that Jessica's drugs use until they were coming to SOMC for Dylan to be delivered. Mr. Groves stated that Daniel Jr. and Dylan are his top priority and that he would do what he needed to do in order to keep them safe. Caseworker Johnson did a safety plan with Daniel Groves until lab came back with the results of the drug scheme. Jessica is out of the home and there is no unsupervised contact.
Okay. And I know it's in there, but I'm going to, for the sake of ease of access, of marked States Exhibit 9, Your Honor. It's been showed to the opposing counsel. Ma'am, I know this is part of this record, but could you identify this for the court?
That is a safety plan.
Is that the safety plan that you referenced in the Children's Services activity log that was initiated by Lauren Johnson?
Yes.
And if we could, see if you can read it from up here on the board. That's a horrible copy, and I apologize. See if we can make it read it. Okay, ma'am, I don't know if you can read that or not from there. Can you see the case name at the top?
No.
Okay. I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm just going to let you read it. This lighting is not great. All right. Ma'am, what's the safety plan you have there in front of you? What's the case name at the top?
Jessica Groves.
Okay. And as you have that there, I need you to really explain what's in that safety plan. So could you explain line by line what we're seeing, what you're going to be reading from?
Okay, it says identify the safety threats and serious harm from which the children needs protection, and it states that Jessica's substance abuse was reported.
Okay.
Then it goes to the action steps, and it says describe the activities necessary to protect the children. And it says Jessica must get a drug and alcohol assessment and sign a release form for us to get copies of everything that she went.
Okay. Let's see if we have it in here. Is it in here?
The second action step would be Jessica is not to be left unsupervised with either child until further notice.
Okay, so the first step was that she wasn't going to live there,
Yes,
and then the second step was that she was going to not be left unsupervised with either child.
yes. Then it says who will be responsible for the activities, and Daniel Groves would be the one responsible.
Okay. And on that, are there signatures at the bottom?
Yes,
Okay. So let me back up. So we've got who will be responsible for the activities, that's on there. And then there's explain how each activity will control the occurrence of serious harm.
the children will be protected.
Okay. And that, the person responsible for that was to be Daniel.
Yes.
Okay. And how will the activities be monitored?
Home visit, and it was to be done weekly, and it was to be done by her, Lauren Johnson.
Okay. And then at the bottom, what do we have here, the signatures was?
The first one is Daniel Groves, the second one is Jessica Groves, and the caseworker's signature.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. You can put that back in that folder. If you need to, at the top. Now I'll find it. So at this point, initially, there is not going to be a removal, but there is a safety plan for this child with his father.
Correct.
All right. And that involved weekly contact, drug treatment for mom, and supervised visits, but she had to remain outside the home unless supervised for visits.
Right.
Okay. What was the understanding of Children's Services with regard to Dad's employment at that time?
At that time, he informed that he had 6 months leave at Rural King.
Okay. And if you would, we're going to look at the activity log report starting, I believe, with January 11th. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. And this activity log report, is this part of the Children's Services record you have in front of you?
Yes.
The business records, Children's Services. Who did this January 11th activity log report? Let me back up. What is an activity log report?
Activity log is what we do as a caseworker, like when we go out and meet the family, what we discuss, what they discuss, and if they need any assistance of everything. We also check for the safety and the basic needs of the children.
Okay. So at the very beginning of the case, whoever from Children's Services is there is going to start logging their activities on the case.
Yes,
Okay. So in this case, we have a log from January 11th of 2019, correct?
yes.
What's it entitled?
It entitles Ms. Johnson speaking to the nursing staff.
Okay. What is the subject of this? Well, why don't you go ahead and, if there are no objections, read that activity log report.
You want to leave that up there on that plastic and then lean forward, that might help the court reporter get a good recording before picking up your voice.
Caseworker Johnson met with SOMC nursing staff on 1/11/19 and asked for them to explain what unconfirmed meant. SOMC nursing staff explained that unconfirmed meant positive, but they are waiting for lab work to make sure that the test is conclusive. Caseworker Johnson met and spoke with Jessica Groves, and she stated that she realized she was pregnant in October when she felt the baby moving. Jessica stated that she has used heroin for about 6 months and continued to use until she found out she was pregnant because she did not want her nor the baby to withdraw. Jessica,
To use after she found out, she continued to use after she found out she was pregnant, correct?
yes.
Okay.
Jessica stated that she has not used in the home around her son or husband and stated that her husband, Daniel, did not know of her drug use until the evening she delivered Dylan.
Okay. And does it go on from there on the next page?
Yes. Caseworker Johnson spoke with Daniel Groves as he stated that he had not known of Jessica's drug use until they were coming to SOMC for Dylan to be delivered. Daniel stated that Daniel Jr. and Dylan are his top priority and that he would do what he needs to in order to keep them safe. Caseworker Johnson did a safety plan with Daniel Groves until the lab work came back with the results of the drug screen. Jessica is out of the house and there is no unsupervised contact.
Now, did Daniel, according to this note, was there any logging of information that the reason there was no prenatal care was because she was continually high?
There's no documentation to that.
All right. And then, so in this period of time, we're talking about January 11th. Dylan was born January 10th, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this is still in the first few days at the hospital. There was indicia in the next note of a drug test or a drug screen for Daniel. Do you see that note? Kind of right in the middle of the page there, face to face.
1/13/2019.
Okay. And what's that say?
It says Caseworker Johnson received a call on this date and time. Caseworker Johnson spoke with social work Kristen Proctor, who stated that Scioto County Children's Service Board needed to take custody of Dylan due to unconfirmed on the drug screens, meaning a positive. Caseworker Johnson explained that unless there was paperwork stating that there were 2 positive screens, Children's Services had nothing to be able to remove Dylan. Caseworker explained that once lab work came back, a decision would be made.
Okay, so at that point, it's documenting there was some kind of misunderstanding between Children's Services and SOMC as to the drug testing. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay. Now, prior to that, on the page before, you referenced a drug screen for Daniel by the caseworker. Do you recall seeing that? That'd be on page 2 of 89. Well, those page numbers might be different, but that'd be after the January 11th note. There's another note face to face.
jury. How's Hutch been treating you down there in the jury room? You doing all right?
Good babysitter.
Should I keep him on a little longer and
Oh, yeah. At least the rest of the week.
at least the rest of the week? Let me ask counsel, would you want me to send the jury out for a break? Will you figure that out, or? Might as well wait in the jury room. At this time, remember my earlier admonition to you, do not discuss this case amongst yourselves, do not permit anyone to discuss it with you in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express an opinion on this case until it's finally submitted to you. Hopefully this will be a short break, and we'll be right back to finish the testimony. Ms. Kraft, you're welcome to sit right there. But I will advise you that you're not to discuss the substance of your testimony with anyone until you've been released. You understand? All right, thank you. You may all be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, during the recess, the attorneys had a lengthy meeting, and they came into my chambers and we had another lengthy meeting while you were in the jury room. It appears that the Children's Services records have come in multiple groups, has been provided through discovery in multiple groups. To ensure that all of the lawyers are looking at the same groups at the same time, we are going to recess this trial at this time, which is a little earlier than I wanted to. However, I think that would be to ensure that all sides have access to those records at the same time. I have reviewed the discovery from the state in this matter for the record. I do find that copies of those records have been provided to the defense, but since they're in multiple binders, I want to get those consolidated into one group so we're all talking about the same thing at the same time. So at this time, we are going to take the evening recess. Now, we had some discussion in chambers. Ms. Kraft is here. She has started her testimony. I understand the state's next witness has rearranged his medical schedule so he can be here at 9 o'clock in the morning. He may or may not be able to be here later tomorrow morning. What is the defense's position on allowing that witness to testify and then taking up Ms. Kraft's direct examination where we left off this afternoon? Mr. Stratton?
No objection, Your Honor.
Ms. Scott?
Your Honor, we would have no objection. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Kraft, what that means for you, unfortunately, is you're going to have to come back tomorrow. Do you want her here at 9 o'clock, Mr. Tiedemann?
I think that would be safe, Your Honor.
The doctor can be here later in the morning. We'll take back up at 9 o'clock with your testimony. If not, you will have to wait a little while, but we'll put you on. You intend to call her back immediately after his testimony?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ma'am, I talked to you a little bit earlier, but we took the recess a little harder because we're going to take an evening break. Since you've not yet concluded your testimony, you're not allowed to talk to anyone about the substance of your testimony until you've come back tomorrow and concluded what you have to say on this case. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
All right. I am going to excuse you. I'm going to direct you to be back here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, 5 till 9 if you would. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am going to excuse you for the evening recess at this time. I am going to ask that you be back here at 5 till 9. The intention that we'll start promptly at 9 o'clock. Remember, you've heard me say this a dozen times now. Remember my earlier admonition to you. You're not to discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. It is your duty not to form or express an opinion on this case until it's finally submitted to you. Remember what we talked about yesterday evening about the newspaper, radio, television, the internet. I don't have that problem because I don't do Facebook, but keep in mind about Facebook also. This time, the bailiff will take you down to the jury room. You'll be excused for the evening from there.
You want to leave your notebooks with me in there, you want to leave your badges on the seats? They'll be there in the morning when you come back. Yes, please leave those on the seat also, or recharge them tonight.
Court is recessed.